Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman, and I am so happy to have you join us today with such a timely topic. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and this is the Financial Wellness Hour. We're going to talk about different situations, life cycles, how to create financial wellness, how to look at them financially as well as emotionally, because we tend to make decisions from an emotional standpoint. And the better prepared, the healthier we are emotionally, the better financial and other decisions we're going to make. Our discussion might be a little bit general today, but we'd love to hear from you. So please join us. You can make comments on YouTube, on Facebook, anywhere else that you are listening. If you want to reach out directly to me, my website is lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. I would love to hear from you. Today's topic, we're going to talk about going through a divorce, strategy, ChatGPT. How do we do this all? And quite honestly, going through a divorce is overwhelming. And many people don't realize that when you go into your negotiation, like mediation, you really should have a strategy. Going in and, so to speak, winging the mediation is not a good strategy. Others want to create a strategy and they probably not sure exactly how to do it and would like to. So what do we do in today's world? Well, we turn to ChatGPT, obviously, right? So the question is whether this is actually the best way to go or not. Our guest today is Jill Kaufman. Jill is, I'm going to say it, a plethora of experience and insights. You're a divorce coach, therapist, parenting educator, co-parenting expert, run an enormous group for divorce professionals, and so much more. I'm just going to put it that way because I'd like to get to the topic. Jill, welcome back. As I said earlier, it's been way too long. I'm excited. I know you're going to have great insights into this for us. So before we kind of get into the topic, can you just share a little on your background? How did you get into what you're doing and why you do it?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Hirsch. I love talking to you about these topics. So I was a parent educator and became a therapist and then went through my own divorce. And as a therapist, I thought I would be able to handle it, reasonably well. And I was a mess. And it's one of the toughest things that anybody can go through. And so after the dust settled, I realized I really wanted to help other people not have it as tough as what I had it, as what I went through. And I actually started mediating. I became a mediator, certified mediator, and then coaching. And I wrote a book and an online course. And we have this great network of divorce professionals all over the country because we need to work together, divorce professionals, to change the industry, because the industry, the way it is, and it has been really not good for people who are going through divorce. It's and I don't want to put down attorneys, but like the attorneys have been running the show for years, and now we're seeing that might not be the best way to start the divorce process. So, I'm really on a mission to change the way people look at divorce and the way people do divorce.
And I love that, that's similar to my background, going through a divorce, realizing it was kind of this cold black hole of information often and didn't know where to go. And there was definitely a better way to do it. I've been divorced 11 years, and the amount of resources that are available now versus, let's say, a decade ago, it's unbelievable what's there. And so many people coming with a passion like yours who they went through a divorce and know we can do it better or help people get through this in a better way. So I like that a lot. It hits my heart, obviously, because I have so many similarities to that. But I think very often those are I'm not trying to say other practitioners are not good practitioners, but sometimes that's really where the heart and passion comes from in the professionals, is having that experience with you. And I think that does make a difference often.
Absolutely.
So, and as I said earlier, going into your divorce, going into a negotiation like mediation without a plan, it's not a good approach. That's not a strategy, right? So let's start off, I guess, by kind of defining a little bit, like share a little, what does it mean to even develop a divorce strategy?
So first of all, when most people go through divorce, they've never been through it before, and they just have no idea what to start, how to start, what to do. I get that question all the time. I'm totally overwhelmed. I have no idea what to do. And that's normal, right? You don't get any kind of schooling or education in divorce. And it is like, a whole new world of, professionals and ways to divorce. And so the first thing you want to do is get educated. And how do you get educated? Well, you can do some education on your own. You can hire somebody like a divorce coach to help you and really walk you through what your options are. Or you can hire an attorney, which is not what I recommend, to really guide you through the whole divorce. And I always tell people this, that lawyers are super important when you're going through divorce, but the law is only 10% of your divorce about. And, there's 90% of your divorce that you're letting this person who has expertise in 10% of your divorce manage. And they really aren't parenting experts. They're not financial experts. They're not emotional, therapists, and they're not coaches. So it really doesn't make sense to hire a divorce attorney to manage your divorce process. And that's where divorce coaching comes in. And you can really understand the process. Like, for example, when you have options, one of the best options is to mediate your divorce. And it depends on your state, and the requirements in your state. Some states require you to file and have a waiting period, but most states don't have a long waiting period. And so you can really mediate your divorce and come to agreement without ever dealing with the court until you're done. So that's the piece that I think a lot of people don't understand from the beginning. And mediation, obviously, Hirsch, it's when a neutral professional works with both parties to come up with an agreement. And the goal of the divorce is to get an agreement on all the financial parts and all the parenting parts. And so when you have a strategy, it's about that agreement, right? It's coming to agreement. And how can you come to agreement? And you can't make a strategy unless you know your priorities and you know the other party's priorities. And that's the key that people don't do most of the time. They don't think about their priorities deeply enough so that they really understand what's most important. Like, a lot of people say to me, this is an example, I don't want the kids to go through too many transitions, so I really need to keep the house. One of us needs to keep the house, and I'd like to keep the house because I take care of the kids more. So that's the most important thing to me. Well, then I ask them, well, can you afford the house? And they're, sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. And that's much more important than the kids dealing with their transition, because as a therapist, I know kids can be perfectly okay moving to a new house as long as you're okay financially. If you're not okay financially and you're in a house that you're stressed about how you're going to pay for it, that is not good for the kids. So little things like that, understanding what's important to you will help you start developing your strategy.
And I'm so happy you brought up the word priority, or prioritizing what you want. Yeah, as hard as it is, because it's very hard. It's emotional. It's challenging. We're not at our best going through a divorce. I wasn't, for sure. But knowing what your priorities are, working with people to understand them, working with somebody to understand what your spouse's priorities might be, because that'll help you set up part of your strategy as well. And thinking beyond the divorce, like you said, well, I want the house because it's on the surface seems like a great idea. And I've got probably a whole hour module sometimes I work with people where I ask them a bunch of questions. And even if you can afford the house, sometimes it's not the best idea for you, right? There's so many things that play in, and coming to a strategy, if you don't know what those priorities are, maybe it is a great idea to keep the house. Let's just say that. Well, how does that play into the strategy? Because now you've got to buy that person out of the house. So now pricing the house becomes part of the strategy. So these things can be 2 and 3 layers deep, which I think is so important, which I like. Again, when you work from your priorities, you can live with less things in your life, but have a more fulfilling life sometimes, because you focus on your priorities and what brings you joy. And I think that's a very, very important piece. It's actually my whole approach is from the priorities and creating your strategy around your priorities. I love that you said that without me even, bringing that up before the show or anything like that. So
We're very aligned.
definitely we are. So understanding priorities, obviously very important. Understanding your spouses. I mean, I'll give you one quick example. I have said it on the show a while back, is we were talking about that, and my client said, oh, the spouse was terrified of debt. The backstory was when he was a kid, he actually went bankrupt, or the parents went bankrupt. They were eating in food kitchens, and it was rough, and he was terrified of debt. They had about $80,000 in credit card debt from the divorce. And so I suggested, well, tell them you'll take 100% of the credit card debt, but you want 2 years worth of interest. Well, if you think about it, 2 years worth of interest is 50% of the debt. So they didn't take really any extra debt, but then they asked for something. If I take 100% of that with 2 years, then I want X. Without batting an eye, the spouse said, take it, I'm fine. So it was a big win because it was a pretty sizable ask. So again, understanding priorities can really help you in your outcome as well, I think. So
Absolutely. And the person who knows the spouse the best is you, right? So you're going to, like, you may not know what their priorities are right away, but you can tell because you know the person, you were married to the person, you can tell what's important to them. And so you really have to think and really dig deep into it. Like, I know this person, what would be important to them?
Right. And, AI is the latest craze, not just in the divorce world. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? And keeping these examples in mind, right? So using a ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, whatever your AI of choice is when going through a divorce, a yay or a nay?
Okay, so it's a more complicated answer than that. I
I
think
know.
I think ChatGPT is a wonderful tool, and it can really help in certain parts of the divorce. For example, this isn't ChatGPT, but there's a company that has a trained ChatGPT. It's a trained
Yeah.
AI that is for victims of domestic violence, and that is amazing because you can put anything in there and it will explain to you why it is domestic violence, what about it is, what you need to use as examples if you're going to court. So it's really helpful. And that's trained. ChatGPT in general, it has some good information. It can give you, like, if you want to write a text to your spouse or an email, it can give you kind of a basis on how to do that, but you can't just take it for what it
Right.
gives out. There's nuance there, and there's things that an AI doesn't understand that people will see and react a certain way. So there's ChatGPT doesn't know any nuance. It doesn't understand that. So you really have to be careful and look over everything that you get out of ChatGPT.
No, I think also, learning how to make those queries is so important, because you can have a similar query and get very different answers or very different guidance out of it. So, if somebody picks query A, it can take them down one path, query B take them down another, but they wanting the same thing and they're basically asking the same thing, but in a different way. So that's something to be aware of. Also, it's getting more accurate, but on some of the technical things, especially tax and things like that, it's not always 100% accurate, or it will give you a technically correct answer, but it really doesn't apply it or put it in a context that applies to you or that is useful. So I actually, this happened to me yesterday. I got a friend of mine who's another CDFA. He did a chat query related to some business, tax and business stuff. Well, splitting a self-employed business, how does it work, all that kind of stuff. And he sent me the query. I read through it. We're actually going to talk after the show today. Technically, it's 100% correct, but I will tell you this. Unless you really understand what it's saying and how it applies to you, it actually can be quite detrimental if you take that path and that course of action versus trying to avoid that course of action. But you wouldn't know that by reading the way it came through from the AI query.
Exactly. And, it may tell you, let's say, to put something into an email and it doesn't understand the tone of what it's saying and how it comes off, right?
Right.
So like it may be a very respectful email, but it doesn't understand that, in your particular situation, your soon to be ex doesn't like being told what to do. So you have to say it in a way that is very, it's their idea. Do you know what I mean? Or something
Right.
like that. Chat GPT won't be able to do that for you.
Right. And the other piece is just in general is ChatGPT goes out to sources all over. Those sources are looking at the general approach or trend. So you can write a fantastic blog maybe on create a divorce strategy, give me the top 10 steps to take or whatever it would be. And it will do a nice job in general. But again, every divorce is very unique. The people are, I always say to clients, if somebody right next door to you with a similar home, probably driving similar car, similar amount of kids gets divorced, their divorce can be a very different experience, very different process from yours. So really putting it in context, putting it in your divorce is missing. And that's a very important part of all of this. So it's not that we shouldn't use a tool like this. Every tool that is going to help us, I think, should be used. But again, understanding its limitations and understanding how to use that tool becomes so much more important. I mean, what do you think?
Absolutely. And I think using it as a first draft for things is fine because you're going to have
Right.
other people look it over. You're going to have an expert hopefully look it over, but you can't use it as your final draft. You have to, like you said, make sure that it's appropriate for your specific situation and that it understands nuances. And, it does get a lot of information from all the things that are, it gets its information for. So it's going to have a lot of information in there, but it might not be the best or up-to-date information because, like, for example, for a while, I think that it's changing now, but for a while, ChatGPT has said the first thing you should do is hire a divorce attorney. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what people were saying. And I think now it's actually learned a little bit, like, you could hire a divorce coach and a divorce attorney and a financial professional. So it is learning, but I think you'll still could get the wrong information. So you always have to check it. You can't
I
100%
agree.
rely on it.
I agree. And putting it, we've like been, I don't want to say dissing on AI a little bit. It is very useful. It's got its limitations. For example, you may do a query and it may actually give you ideas or thoughts to think about that you didn't even think about. So there are definitely pros to using it. But again, understanding its limitation and understanding you and your process is unique become very important. And I can't believe we're already halfway through the show. So I'm going to ask before we go to break, can you just share how people can get in touch with you to learn more? And I would recommend there's a lot of great information that Jill shares. So
Thank you. Yes. My website is divorcecoachjill.com. I also have a free Facebook group. It's called Separation and Divorce Support Community. And my email is info@divorcecoachjill.com.
and we will be right back. Hello and welcome back to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. I am your host, Hirsch Serman. This is the Financial Wellness Hour. We have Jill Kaufman joining us today. Jill is a divorce coach, a therapist, co-parenting expert, a great resource all around, author, created classes and more. So please reach out. Earlier we gave out her information. We will give it out again, but I do recommend reaching out. I do want to recap a little bit. There's so many things that we covered. Quite honestly, I was amazed at how much we covered in just 18, 19 minutes. But you did cover your background and the passion and what a little bit of what your journey was and how it led you to where you are. We spoke about having a plan and not kind of winging it or going into negotiation or mediation without that. I loved, because especially how aligned it is, starting with your priorities. That is kind of the beginning point. Again, as you said, it's essential to have an attorney in the process. Very often, it's not the starting point. Your priorities, your feelings, your emotions, your wants are not necessarily the legal thing. I actually know somebody often says that divorce is a human process with a legal document at the end. To your point, the legal side is maybe 10% of the entire process. So keep that in mind. Keeping focus beyond the divorce was another thing we spoke about. Having a strategy. We brought up an example of the home. Is it right to keep the home even if you can afford it? Why are you keeping the home? Long-term outlook, looking beyond the divorce becomes so important. We spoke about AI a lot. One of the big things, be careful how you ask it, because if you have slightly different ways in that query, you can get very different answers. But I think I'm going to sum it up. It's a very useful tool. It's a great beginning point maybe, but really to understand how all of the information fits into your situation. Is it applicable, and how to use it appropriately, I think is probably how I would sum that up. And again, that's 10 minutes in about 10 seconds. So I'm not doing it justice. So one of the things you brought up is the things that you get asked early on. And two questions I get asked all the time is, am I going to be okay? Is number one. And then the other one is, how do I protect my kids so they're going to be okay? Sometimes we need to be our kids' best advocates. They often do not have a voice in this process. And so it's up to the parents really to protect them, make sure they're okay. So how do you navigate divorce while protecting your children?
That's a great question, because, parents, I know how I felt. You do everything you can to protect your children, and all of a sudden you're doing something that's actually hurting them. And you feel there's so much guilt, and there's so much fear of what's going to happen. And it does affect children. Divorce affects children just like any big family issue. And so what I always tell people is that if you're okay, your kids can be okay. And the biggest thing that affects kids is the relationship between the parents. So they've done studies that says they've compared intact families to divorced families. And the main difference between the kids coming out okay is the relationship between the parents. So it doesn't matter if you're in an intact family or a divorced family. If there's a lot of fighting, a lot of tension, anger, different difficulties, it's going to negatively affect the kids. So the more you can get along with each other and be respectful to each other, the better it is for the children. And I know that's really difficult as you're going through divorce, because it is kind of an adversarial process, but you can make it less adversarial by using processes like mediation. You can also not participate in the negativity. If your soon-to-be ex is high conflict, there are ways that you can communicate with them that will lower the conflict. You can also be very clear about boundaries and say, we are not going to talk about this in front of the kids. We're not going to put the kids in the middle. And one great tool to help with this is co-parenting counseling. You can talk with a professional so that you both understand how to communicate and how to be respectful for the good of the children and work through things. So there's tools out there to help if this is a problem. But in a lot of cases, if you both put the children first, the children will be okay.
Yeah, I like so much of what you said there. If you're going to be okay, you can certainly help your kids in a much better way. If you're a mess and you're just going after your pound of flesh, you're not going to help your children, right? You have an opportunity to role model for your kids in a way, quite honestly, very few parents get to actually role model. You're going through possibly the biggest adversity and conflict of your life as a divorcee. How do you role model that? And how do you role model the ability to handle adversity for your children? I think becomes enormous. And, you mentioned high conflict. So many people will tell you, I'm divorcing a narcissist. It's like 98% of the people are narcissists because the client and me are the only ones that are not, right?
Right.
So what I want to say to that is, even if somebody's not a narcissist, they might sometimes have narcissistic tendencies or high conflict. So it doesn't mean that they're not high conflict. So understanding this before you go in obviously is important. But sticking with the theme of taking care of your children, how do you co-parent with somebody who is high conflict and who might just be a difficult person to deal with in general?
I mean, I have so many clients who are doing that, and it is possible. I mean, it's very important not to get drawn into the conflict, which is really hard because they're going to do things to provoke you. They're going to say things. They're going to act in ways to provoke you. But every time you're surprised by that, you're
Yes.
not recognizing and accepting that this is who they are. And so, I mean, use a therapist, use a coach, make sure that you understand that this is what you're dealing with, and it's not going to be surprising the next time they do something that's difficult because this is who they are. And when they do something or say something, if you can, take some deep breaths and respond in um I always talk about, Hirsch, I'm sure you've heard me talk about, but your amygdala, which is your base of your brain, and that gets triggered when a high conflict person says or does something. If you can learn how to take deep breaths and use self-talk to make sure that your prefrontal cortex is working, and that's the thinking part of your brain, then you can think through how you want to respond. Then you won't write back a reactive text right away. You'll put it away, you'll take deep breaths, and you'll deal with it at a later time. So you can only control your reactions and your responses, and those things can be changed. And, I always talk about Bill Eddy, who is a guru in high conflict, who, I just love his techniques. One of them is the BIF method, which you want to be brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And so that's a specific technique on how to respond to high conflict people that really works. And it doesn't allow you to get emotional and drawn into all of the things that they want to draw you into, and still be able to communicate, because you have to communicate with each other. So
Right.
they're good
And
techniques.
I think working with someone like Jill becomes so essential here because you know ahead of time if somebody's going to be difficult. It's not like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, where did this come from, right? Knowing it's happening, knowing and getting techniques and tools and a sounding board on how to navigate that. Or I know a difficult conversation's coming up. I don't know how to handle this. You can turn to someone like Jill. I think those are so important in it because the more that you can de-escalate, the less opportunity that person has to escalate. Because if you escalate, it gives them all the right. You've just opened the door for them, right? And so I think having that, being able to prepare, thinking it through ahead of time, like we were talking about going into a negotiation, a mediation as an example. If you know whatever you offer, they are just going to say, nope, nope, what are you, crazy kind of thing. How do I handle that? How do I go into that? How do I draw them into the conversation in a nice way? You don't like my offer? I can understand we don't all get along. Let's hear it from you kind of thing. But how do I draw that out? How do I draw that out in a way without saying, well, you'll never agree with anything I want? That's not the best way. So how do
And
we
attorneys are trained to fight for what you want. So what's going to happen is, if you get a high conflict person, provoking you, your attorneys thinks, oh, I have to protect him or her, and will write a letter back that will be really attacking and provoking them. And I've seen this happen so many times where, the client thinks that the attorney's protecting them, but they're actually creating more conflict. And so you really have to manage your attorney to make sure that you don't add to the conflict, and you have to be strategic in how you approach them,
Right.
even when they're being unreasonable.
And by the way, if that's what's happening and your attorney is trying to protect you but putting fuel on the fire, someone like Jill can help you work with that person also. How do we contain that a little bit? So Jill, we are running out of time, unfortunately. I've got one more question, and then I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about your free giveaway and anything else you have. But one of the big things we said, thinking beyond the divorce, is so important. So I'm going to ask you to share 1 or 2 tips on, when you're living in different homes, there's different parenting styles, there's different rules. Maybe a significant other comes into the picture. Talk a little bit. That can certainly complicate the issue. If you can give a couple tips quickly on how to do that, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, I think it starts when you're going through the divorce. Think about what you want in your life post-divorce. But once you're post-divorce, it is easier to get space from each other, right? So you're not living with each other. It feels the same. A lot of times the behavior is the same, and it feels like you're still in a house together and married, but it's not. And I think you have to do a shift in your thinking. And instead of thinking as someone who you were married to, think of this person as a colleague or a coworker, and you're just co-parents with this person. And so how would you react and respond to a colleague? Would you say that to a colleague? If they said something to you that was inappropriate, what would you say back? So you really have to do this mind shift of, okay, now I'm dealing with someone who is not, it doesn't matter that we were married. We are not married anymore, and we have to work together for the good of our children. And really recognize that it's not as bad as things were. Things are better. You have space, even though it doesn't feel good if they say something or do something that is negative. You have your own space. I remember when I walked into my house by myself the first time, I was like, if there's peace here, this is peaceful. I get to control everything. Yes, I have to deal with my ex, but it's so different than when you're living under the same roof and you're dealing with each other as a married couple. So really recognize the differences and get support and get help if you need it.
Right. And I meant to read something earlier. I got to read this because I did a ChatGPT as an example on one of the questions that we spoke about. How is a co-parenting relationship different than the relationship you had when you were married? What we've just spoken about, right? It gives you a whole bunch of stuff, all nice and good. And then it says, in short, co-parenting is more like a professional partnership with a shared mission. I don't know that I would agree with that. I wouldn't look at it as my kids as a professional partnership. I want to nurture them. I want to grow them. I want to put it in. So again, some of the nuance or some of that kind of intimacy of a relationship that humans have definitely gets lost with AI. There's no
Absolutely. Question. Yeah. But it should be that, but it's very hard for that to happen. Yeah. Correct. There's emotions involved. So
exactly. So technically correct.
Doesn't understand that.
Right. The technically correct, but the nuance is lost. Jill, we got to wrap up. Give 2 things. One, I know that you have a wonderful giveaway, and then how can people get it and how to get in touch with you?
So I have, 8 guidelines for separated and divorcing parents. You just go to go.divorcecoachjill.com/8 guidelines. And it is just a beginning guide to how to co-parent, some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and really just tips and tools on how to do that more effectively.
So I appreciate it. You can go to divorcecoachjill.com and reach out directly as well. And I do encourage it. I mean, through our dialogue, obviously it's so evident that this is complex. There's a lot to consider, especially, only get kind of one chance to go through this divorce. We want to do it right. And we want to come out with our integrity. We want to come out as good role models on the other side. So Jill, thank you for sharing so many great insights. And I knew I wasn't putting pressure on you in the beginning by saying that. But wading through this fog, sometimes you really do need a really good guide and somebody who can guide you with that. So I appreciate it. I am Hirsch Serman, the host of Financial Wellness Hour. And please reach out to me at my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. I also want to thank CC Schatz behind the scenes for making everything happen. Always makes it just easy for us to get lost in our conversation. It's a little early, but hopefully fall is coming for everybody. Hopefully you have a good fall. And I look forward to seeing you at my next show. I appreciate you joining. Thank you.